We Saved You a Seat is sponsored by the Oklahoma Family Network. Oklahoma Family Network focuses on supporting families of children and youth with special health care needs and disabilities, as well as families who have children with a mental health or behavioral health diagnosis. Oklahoma Family Network provides families with emotional support, resource navigation, parent-to-parent engagement opportunities, and wants to ensure quality health care for all children and families by building strong and effective family-professional partnerships. Welcome back to part 2 of Salena King-Coughlin's journey into the statistical world of maternal morbidity and mortality. Today's release focuses on Salena's delivery and the impact hospital staff can have on families and patients. Thank you again to Salena for sharing her story as we jump back into our conversation already in progress.
I know something's wrong with her. She hasn't moved. Like, I need to be seen, and I'm not leaving here until I'm seen. So she calls the charge nurse, and they end up calling my provider, who happened to be on call that weekend. And he says, yeah, get her in. So all of a sudden, they have a bed available. We get her hooked up to the monitors, and they're like, oh, yeah, there's her heart rate. She's okay. My blood pressure was a little high. But they ran all my labs, and they were like, we're just going to treat it like a normal, induction, right? On the board. Happy birthday. They kind of go over our preferences. And they told me, we're only doing this for fun, this team birth board. They said, we're only doing this for fun because once you sign the consent, you don't really have any rights. Your provider just is going to do what he's going to do. That's going to be what happens. And so, as we'll talk about later, I'll just never forget when we're going through all of these layers of things going wrong, looking at this board where I had listed all of these things and being like, what a joke. Like, why do we even have this? This is like such a joke because again, it did feel like that. Once I signed anything, they treated me as if I had no rights. It was just, you're here and we're making all the decisions and it doesn't matter what you say. And I
You're right.
remember being like, this is so wonderful. And then after we filled it out, she said, again, this is just for fun. Because I was very against, I did not want forceps. And I told them, I said, that is a big no for me. Take me to a C-section. I do not want you to use forceps. Don't do it. I had done my research. That's what I decided for my body. I understand that's not for everyone, but I said that's not what I want for me or my baby. And she said, well, that's not really up for you to decide. It's up to the doctor. And that's when she said, well, if you sign this consent, once you sign it, like all of that kind of goes out the window. That's why this is just
Wow.
for fun.
Okay, so you've kind of started the process of the
Hmm.
induction. You are now in a room. They've started all of the, I'm assuming some of the drips and got you prepped and ready to go. So was it a super quick birth? Was it, I mean, we're like within 24 hours you had Sophia? I'm kind of thinking that that's not the case, but definitely let us know.
I wish that it was a super quick birth. I wish that was the story that I was here to tell today, but unfortunately it's not. So I labored for about 36 hours. So I had pain medicine. They had started Cytotec and Cervidil, and that ended up, I checked in, like I said, I told you that I basically refused to leave. So that was around 8 a.m. was when I got in there. They started my Cytotec around 11 a.m. And that was like an oral dose of the Cytotec. And then they did 4 doses of that. And I now know that they can't do more than 4 doses of that because it increases maternal morbidity and death outcomes, right? Mortality. So then they switched to Cervidil because I was starting to contract. I think I was at a 1 or I was at a 2. So it had been, this was by the evening time. So it had been like 12 hours and I was still only at a 2. Sophia hadn't descended. She hadn't started really going down anywhere. Um, and a sidebar is that I had had an exploratory surgery where they essentially told me that the way my pelvis was shaped, it would likely be hard for my child when I did have a baby. It wouldn't be hard to get pregnant, but that it may be hard for me to deliver vaginally because of the way my pelvis is tilted. And a baby, it may be hard for them to make their way out or to descend. And I had told my OB this several times, and they reiterated over and over again that it was not going to be a problem, that they don't even know why someone would say that, and that it was not even on their mind. They just let it go. So, anyway, as she started not progressing, I started telling them, my nurse, hey, I'm in pain. I don't think my baby's moving down. Like these things are not going the way they're supposed to go. It could be because this, thing that I found out about myself. And they said, no, that's not it, which it may not be. We'll never know. That's not a big part of the story. But when around midnight, my contractions started speeding up, and the nurse came in and said, it may be good for you to take a nap, like to go to sleep. You've been awake, at this point for 24 hours because I hadn't felt my baby move at 3 a.m. So I really never went to bed the night before because I was so anxious about her dying or me dying because I knew something was wrong. And I said, okay. She gave me some pain medication, and I asked, will this affect my baby? She said, no, not at all. It should be fine. And so at midnight, around midnight, I went to sleep, and I woke up at 1:30 in the morning on 10/12, so on Saturday 10/12, and my monitor showed that her heart rate, which had always been at like 130 to 140, she's never dipped below that, all of a sudden was at like 105. And it had stayed that way. It never went back up. So after I took that pain medication, her heart rate never went above 120 ever again while I was in labor. And so I was concerned. So I called the nurse in and I said, hey, I don't understand why her heart rate's so low. Is it because of this medicine I just took? Did that get transferred to her? I was reassured, no, you're going to be fine. We just need to try new positions, all this stuff. So I'm moving around. I'm doing all of these different positions, all of the peanut ball and trying to get things moving a little further. So at around 4 a.m., I was at, I think, a four, so at a 4 or 5. And my physician ended up being on the floor because he was doing a C-section. And so he had told the nurse that he wanted to go ahead and do my epidural since he was already there and on the floor. And so they got my epidural started. So I got an epidural placed at right around 4 in the morning on 10/12 of 2024. And that was fine. The placement was fine. My doctor actually came in and, put his hand on my shoulder and said, you're doing great, and was like really reassuring. And I felt okay. He's like really in tune, and this is going to be fine. Everything's okay. And I reiterated to him that I was concerned about her heart rate, and he told me she's fine. This is normal. You're fine. The epidural should help. And so I rested from I think 5 a.m. to around 7:45 in the morning. And when I woke up, my epidural was working very well and I couldn't feel anything from like my chest down. And so I had a panic attack about the fact that I couldn't feel or move anything, and I did not like that at all. But it was working, and I had started progressing a little more. The new nurse came in and introduced herself. She checked me, and everything was okay. My mom showed up around 8 in the morning, and I remember we all just kind of hung out for a little bit, thinking, I was at a 6 at this point. At by 9, I think I was at a 7, and everyone was calling people, preparing for, my baby to make her way, because 7, typically it would start progressing faster. But by 10 a.m., the nurse came back in and she asked if I wanted to check, and I said yes. And I told her, hey, I am feeling my body. Like I can like move. I'm feeling, I think this epidural is starting to wear off. And she is like, no, it's not. And I'm telling her that the machine is beeping. The machine is saying epidural runs out in 1 hour, epidural out in whatever, and I'm starting to feel things. And she's like, no, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. Well, she goes to check me and she's like, we'll know actually, if your epidural's actually working because when I check your cervix, you'll be able to feel it if it's not working and it'll hurt. So let's do that. And I said, okay. So she checked and I said, yeah, I can feel that. That hurts. And she said, oh, let me check. And of course, the epidural was completely out. She refills it. And I think she checked and she said, this is when she said this. Yes, she said, oh, well, you're at a 7. I'll never forget. She went, but I could stretch you to a 9. And I was like, what an odd thing to say to someone. That's weird. She's like, but your baby isn't putting pressure on your cervix because she hasn't descended. Because I think if she had descended, you would be having like she would be here. And so I'm thinking, okay, it's like 11 in the morning, 10:30, 11 in the morning. By, I don't know, noon or 1, if I haven't progressed anymore or she hasn't progressed, like, what's the next step? So I start asking. She's like, well, we would, put you in different positions to get her to move, and I could put you on oxygen because maybe she needs oxygen. And so I start telling her, okay, let's do that. Because at this point, I'm starting to get a fever. I don't feel well. And I am telling her, my water's been broken for a while. I quit, you know, progressing at all. I never got past a 7. So from 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. from when she checked me to till I had her, I was at a 7. And so I had just been open at a 7, no progression for that whole 12-hour shift of that nurse. And she told me that she would not call my doctor because he was watching the OU Texas game and she didn't want to interrupt him. And that she knew that he would not do anything unless her heart stopped or I had a fever and my blood pressure got too high. Then during this 12-hour shift, my vein also blew 3 times. So the charge nurse had to come in. There were like 3 or 4 nurses that came in. They had to call the IV team. They had to stop my Pitocin. They had to do all of these different interventions because they had no IV vein access. And so there was just a lot of miscommunication happening, it felt like to me, where someone would come in my room and they would say, oh, how's everything going? You're doing great. Or, oh, it'll be 4 hours before the IV team can get in here, but then they were there within 30 minutes. Or it'll be this long before this. And that nurse kept coming in and saying, oh, well, I don't really want to be a labor and delivery nurse. I want to do XYZ. And going on a tangent about how, we would try these things later, but unless we were dying, like no one was intervening. So I think I asked for a C-section in that 12 hours probably 10 times. I said, please just take me, please just call my doctor, take me to get a C-section because something is wrong. And my epidural failed twice. That was the first time I told you that it wore out, and then it happened again. They had to come in and give me a bolus. And I can feel the whole thing. So there's actually a video of my mom giving me a pep talk and me just like having a panic attack because I'm like, I didn't prepare for this. And I'm very type A. So I prepared for everything except what happened to me. That whole entire 12 hours that this nurse was in here, she changed my position. She never escalated to oxygen. I begged for her to escalate. I kept saying, please just call my doctor. Please, please. Like, I don't care like what he's doing. There's something wrong. And he never came back. My doctor never came back to check on me. I didn't see him again until I was being wheeled into my emergency C-section.
Yeah, none of that was on that birth plan that you filled out. I mean, you don't plan for the crisis moments. And I think that somehow we need to figure out a good way to help families plan for crisis moments.
Mhm.
Either education
Yeah.
or something, give them some
Yeah.
tools in the tool belt to know how to advocate appropriately. So
Hmm.
I'm assuming they finally got a hold of your doctor to come in and do a C-section. And so what time was about the C-section?
What ended up happening is that nurse went off shift. So I had her that whole 12 hours. So it's 7:30 in the evening. And a new nurse came in and she was incredible. She walked in my room and looked, and I think for like 2 seconds, looked at me, looked at the monitor, and I don't think left my room again, other than like 2 minute increments, right? She came in my room and she said, "How long have has this been happening on the monitor about Sophia's heart rate?" And I said, "Hours." And checked me and she said, "You're still at a 7. How long have you been at a 7?" I said, "Since 10 a.m." And she said, "And you're feeling your contractions?" And I said, "Yes, I don't feel like my epidural is working at all at this point." So I'm crying in pain. I mean, I'm like beating the side of the hospital bed just trying to get through these because also my Pitocin, the nurse before had bumped it up. So on top of this, my contractions were so heightened because it was even past a normal dose of Pitocin to try and get her to move down is what they had told me, that they were going to ramp up contractions to squeeze, so it squeezed her tighter so that she would go down. And she never did. That nurse came in and she told me that they were going to have to do internal monitoring, and that, I know the risks of those because that is something I had prepared for, thinking through. And I said, I need like a minute to talk to my husband about this. So this is probably at 8:20 p.m. It had probably been an hour since she came on shift and had tried the oxygen and moving me around and doing all of these things. And I do know she called the doctor and they had discussed the internal monitoring. And so I said, I need a minute because I needed to prepare my husband and my mom for the fact that, with that internal monitoring, uterine rupture and all of these different things are higher likelihood, a hemorrhage, like things going wrong with me, that is risky to do that. And I was happy to do it if it kept my baby safe, right? But I wanted to talk it through with my support system to let them know this is not just they're sticking something in there and it's all going to be okay. It could go very wrong. And I remember thinking everything has went wrong at this point, right? My epidural didn't work. I had this nurse who was not moving anything forward. My baby wasn't going down the way she was supposed to. My veins weren't working. Like everything had went wrong. And I remember thinking that this is probably where I was going to die. I remember being like, this is probably the thing that's going to kill me. Like I have thought it was going to happen. So I just want you guys to be prepared that if this happens, like there's an opportunity for these things to go wrong. And she said, "Okay, I'll give you a couple minutes." She left the room and I had a very, very, very strong contraction, probably 15 seconds later. And when I looked at the monitor, Sophia's decel after that contraction, I mean, essentially was done. Like her heart just stopped for a long time and then came back on. And she ran in my room and she said, you don't need to talk about this anymore. You have to have a C-section right now. Your doctor's on the way here. I have him on the phone. You have to consent right now with him on the phone to the C-section because we have to take you now. And I said, "Okay, of course, yes, please. I've been asking for a C-section. Obviously, I didn't want a C-section, but I've been asking you guys to do something. So if this means it's time, and we can do that, great." And so I said, "Okay." They get me ready. They put all the stuff on, change me into I had one of those fun little comfy birthing gowns on because that's just, one of those things that people do. And so they had to change me into the hospital gown. They had to take me, put my hair up and all the things. And so they rushed me back there and I see my doctor and he's like, "You've had a rough day." And I'm like, that's the understatement of the year. But yes. And I remember that they told me that they couldn't wait for my husband to get back there because it was emergent, right? Or urgent. I know that technically those are in medical terms two different things now, but it was, they needed her out. They needed to get her out. And so, as a reminder, my epidural hadn't been working fully. this whole time. And they didn't have time to do a spinal because they needed to get her out. So I got a bolus from the anesthesiologist, and they did the cold test, which is where they take like an alcohol wipe and they wipe it on your skin and say, "Can you feel that this is cold or not?" And I told them, "Yes, I can feel that. I can feel that that's cold." And they said, "Oh, well, let's push more." So they gave more medicine or did something, and then they did it again. And I said, I can feel that. Like it's a little less, but I can still feel that." And my doctor leaned over the curtain and he said, um, "I really need to get her out. Can you feel that?" And I said, "Nope, can't feel it." Because to me, it felt like, "Hey, I understand you're saying you can feel this, but we have to get her out." And so that's what they did. And the I remember halfway through the second layer, because I'm not sure if you've ever had an epidural, but it's you can still feel things. But it started to get really painful in the third layer. So I could tell where he was on the first and second layers that they were moving through for the C-section. And that was about when my husband made his way in, when he was able to come in. And so I decided in that moment, I don't know if I just went into like a fight or flight thing or what, but I just shut all that out because I didn't want to alarm my husband, because I thought he would alert the doctor, who would then stop, and then my baby wouldn't be okay because of that. So my husband is, "Hey, you're doing great." They're doing, and I'm just blocked. I'm blocked, right? I'm in this like just fight or flight, completely still. I mean, I was shaking. My arms were shaking because I had the labor shakes. And I remember leaning over and asking my nurse anesthetist, I said, "Am I going to ruin the C-section? Is he going to cut the baby because I'm shaking?" And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I'm shaking." And she said, "Oh, your body's not shaking. Like your lower half isn't shaking right now. It's just up here right now." And I said, "Okay." And then that was it. And I told her, "I feel a little nauseous, but I just shut it down." I remember grinding my teeth like as tight as I could and just trying to, I don't know, like hold it together. Because I could feel it, right? Like I knew, hey, you're cutting into this, you're moving things. And when they went to go get her out and he took the elbow and started shoving to get her to come out, I remember my husband being like, "Did you just flinch?" Because I did. I was like, and because I felt that it hurt really bad, really, really, really bad. And I was like, "No, no, I no." Yeah, because I just didn't want, they had already told me they needed to get her out. So I didn't want to be the reason that something happened to her, because again, I knew something was wrong. And they got her out and she cried, and I thought, "Okay, I'm, okay, it's fine. We made it through that. It's going to be fine." And so my husband, I kept telling him, like, go to her, because I knew it was taking too long. I knew they should have just suctioned and gave her back, because I had asked before, which I don't think they would have followed the birth. I don't think anyone even looked at my birth plan thing. But I had asked, "Please bring her to me, maybe put her on my chest, even in the event of a C-section," right? I just knew that it had been taking too long. So I kept telling my husband, like, "Leave, go be with Sophia, go, 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 like get away from me so that I can tell this doctor that something is wrong, that I can feel things," right? And even at that point, I wish that I could say that I was thinking about how much I wanted Sophia to be on my skin. And it hurts me to say that I wasn't. But all I could think about in that exact moment was I just needed him and her to be out of the room so that I could be put to sleep, because it was too much. And that, when I think, and this makes me so sad, because when I think back to Like the moment that I met her, I don't remember them bringing her over. She had a cannula in her nose, and like I don't remember seeing that. I don't remember any of that. And if you look at pictures and videos, they take the picture and my whole face is red and I'm just not smiling. I'm just, ashen almost with like red. And that makes me really sad. But in the videos, you hear them say, like, you have 2 minutes with mom, like, I can give you, and then we got to go. Like, we have to go. And at this point, I still didn't know that anything was seriously wrong because no one had told me anything. My husband left. I told him, please leave with her, like, follow her to wherever they're taking her so that, again, I could get medicine because I didn't want him to be freaking out. I wanted him to be there with her because I knew I couldn't, even emotionally, I wasn't there. And so they leave, and I lean back and I told the nurse anesthetist, and I said, I can feel him. I said, how much longer? And she said, probably 15 or 20 minutes. And I said, I can feel him stitching right now, and I need you to do something. I need you to do something right now because I can feel it, and I'm gonna puke all over everyone. Like, it's too much. And the longer that it went on, which I now understand was because my bolus had started to wear off, right? The longer I was on the table, the more I started to feel. And because they're deeper in the skin and stuff. But by the time I remember being like, oh, you're on this layer. Okay, you're here. And that's when I said, I can't do this anymore. If you look at my medical records, there's like she was born at 9:58 p.m. is when Sophia was born. 9:58 p.m. on October 12th, 2024. And at 10:12, they start shooting me up in my IV with morphine, fentanyl, all of these things to knock me out. Right. So it's like, here's this one dose. Here's Zofran. Cause I'm like, I'm going to puke everywhere. So I got Zofran. It's 9:58, baby born. And then it's like, I get all of these like very intense drugs immediately afterwards, like 10 minutes later, which is now I understand that was the 10 minutes that they were in there trying to get the meconium out of her, and that I kept telling Tyler, go back to her because he would come back to me and go back to her and go back and forth. And then when they left was probably around that 10:12 because that's when I said, you need to put me out. So they put me to sleep, essentially. Obviously, I wasn't under general anesthesia, but I got medicine I fell asleep. I don't remember after that for the remainder of the time. I remember waking up and I was still in the OR, but my doctor was sitting next to me. He was sitting in his chair at my head, and he said, "Your surgery went perfect. Your baby is healthy. When you get back to your room," he said, we're gonna move you to a new table right now, and then we're gonna wheel you back to your bed, and your baby and your husband, they'll be in your room waiting with your family. I know that's not ideal, but everyone's okay, and your surgery went perfectly. And I remember being like, okay, like whatever. I'm not gonna argue with you. Like, okay, cool. And so they do all the things he said they were going to do. And they wheel me back to my room. And I expected, obviously, to see my husband and my baby in the room with my mom and my nana and my dad, because that's who was in the delivery room. And nobody was in there. And it was my mom and my nana. And I looked at them and they looked at me. And I remember, I think all of our brains said the same question at the same time, which was, where is my baby? Where is Sophia? Where's Tyler?
Thank you so much for listening in to part 2 of my conversation with Salena. I know you will not want to miss the next episode as we hear more about their journey of bringing sweet Sophia into this world. Thank you for listening to this episode of We Saved You a Seat. Oklahoma Family Network promotes family-centered care and provides tools so families can make informed decisions, advocate for improved services, build connections among families, and serve as a trusted resource in health care of children and young adults. If you would like to become a supporting family or get in touch with another family, please contact Oklahoma Family Network at oklahomafamilynetwork.org or by calling 405-271-5072.